General Motors announced yesterday that it's boosting its the amount of capital it's going to invest in electric vehicle manufacturing yet again. This now it's up to $35 billion by 2025. That started out as 20 billion in 2020. Later that year, it went up to 27. Now it's at 35. Who knows what it's going to be next year? The arms race in electric vehicle manufacturing is on, folks, and we're going to talk to Sam Abel-Samit about that. He's the EV analyst for Guidehouse Insights. So welcome to the interview, Sam.
Hello, Markham. Good to be with you again.
So am I accurate in saying this is an EV arms race? The automakers are racing for dominance in the marketplace?
Yeah, I think that's a reasonably accurate description of it. As the price of batteries has come down, and a combination of increasing consumer interest in EVs as well as regulatory pressures in most of the major markets, is pushing the entire industry to really ramp up their plans and accelerate, bring forward their plans to introduce new electric vehicles.
One of the things I found interesting about GM's release is, I mean, these guys aren't fooling around. They say they want to be the leading supplier of batteries. They want to be leading. They want to lead in autonomous driving with Cruise. They want to lead across the different segments. And you can find similar announcements from Ford and from VW and so on. I mean, and I'm sure, yeah, I can't. If I had them translated, the press releases from the Chinese manufacturers would say essentially the same thing.
Yeah, we've seen this sort of leapfrogging in particular between Ford and General Motors over the last several months, and we saw Ford, last year announced that they were going to increase their electrification investment from 11 to 22 billion dollars. Then more recently they bumped that up, after GM bumped theirs up to 27 billion. Ford went to 30 billion. Now GM's going to 35 billion, and this most recent announcement from GM as part of that $35 billion investment by 2025. There's the 30 battery electric vehicles that they've talked about introducing by 2025, but there's also increased battery production, and this is one of the really big changes across the industry is automakers getting into cell production on their own. Previously, they never considered cell production to be a core competency of the business, in part because the number of EVs that were selling was so small, it didn't justify the investment in manufacturing infrastructure. But now GM has their joint venture with LG Chem, Ultium Cells LLC. They've already got two plants under construction in Lordstown, Ohio, and Spring Hill, Tennessee. And as part of the $35 billion announcement, they announced that they're going to add two more plants by 2025, bringing them to four with a total capacity of 140 gigawatt hours per year just for General Motors.
Now, Sam, over the years, I've talked to analysts, and the inflection point on the EV adoption S curve was going to be in the early 20s. The early 30s. Then it was going to be in the late 20s, and then it was going to be 2025. Only a few months ago, according to experts I've interviewed. And I'm going to go out on a limb here. I'm going to say this is it. We've hit the inflection point for EV adoptions, and basically, if you think of it as a hockey stick, we were at the toe 10, 12 years ago. Now we're at the heel, and sales are going to ramp up, and we're now basically on the shaft of the hockey stick. We're going to have hockey stick growth from here on, as exemplified, and because these investments by the automakers are a necessary condition for that kind of growth.
Yeah, I don't know if we're, at least in North America, if we're quite up the shaft yet, but we're getting there. We're very close to it. In the next 18 to 24 months, I think we'll definitely be there as a bunch of the new products that have been announced actually go on sale in that time frame. GM is selling the Bolt EV and the Bolt EUV right now, but later this year they're launching the Hummer, followed by another 15 or so vehicles over the next 24 months. Ford has the Mach-E, the Mustang Mach-E. They're going to be adding the E-Transit F-150. They just announced last week the first Lincoln EV is also going to launch next year. Stellantis is holding an electrification day on July 8th, where they're expected to announce some more details. Volvo just announced last week, or Polestar actually, which is owned by Volvo, announced that their next EV, the Polestar 3, a crossover, is going to be built in South Carolina beginning next year. So everybody's bringing a whole slew of new products to market, and as those products become available to consumers, I think that's where we'll really start to see it kick off. Right now, in the U.S. market, there's about 20 battery EVs available, 20 different nameplates available, and that's going to probably triple in the next 2 years, and that's when we'll really see the numbers really begin to take off, hopefully.
Let, let's discuss another aspect of this, Sam, because you talk to these manufacturers all the time. And I'm curious about the role of climate policy or policy in general on this, because it seems like the governments enact stronger climate policy. Then the manufacturers say, okay, that's a signal to us. These guys are serious about EVs. We're going to ramp up production. Then government looks at that and goes, hey, you know what? These guys are making it easier now to achieve our policy goals. We're now going to ramp up policy. You get in this virtuous cycle going. That's my take on it. What are the manufacturers saying to analysts and journalists like you?
Well, certainly, here in the U.S. Over the past 4 years, the administration that we had prior to January of this year was not at all interested in ramping up any regulations. But at the same time, while the former administration was not doing anything, we actually did see the industry moving forward with this. There was a recognition over the last several years that climate change is a reality that they're going to have to deal with. And this is actually increasingly true across all industries, not just the automotive industry. And so they started putting in place their plans to move ahead, regardless of what the federal government here in the U.S. was doing. I think the situation is a little bit different in Canada with the Trudeau government, but it's also a much smaller market, and it's not likely to be one that drives the industry in a particular direction. So the combination of regulatory policies in Europe and in China, and the recognition from the industry that they need to move forward on this, start adopting science-based target initiatives for climate or carbon neutrality, is pushing everybody towards really adopting this much quicker. And everyone in the industry is recognizing what's happening around us in the environment, and they're moving towards trying to address that the best they can.
Sam, now you mentioned, especially with GM, we've had these like 3 bumps in capital investment intentions over the last year and a half, maybe. And are we done, or are we going to see over the next little while that maybe the domestic manufacturers in North America and the Europeans and the Chinese and Japanese and Koreans will, there's lots more room for further capital expansion?
Yeah. I think we may see a little bit more increase from GM. What we've heard from GM so far mostly, has been the amount of money they're going to spend, not necessarily public announcements of where it's going to be spent, how it's going to be spent, aside from the 4 battery plants that they're investing in and 4 assembly plants that they've publicly announced. But there will be more announcements of how they're going to spend that investment. And we are going to hear a lot more detail and announcements from other manufacturers, certainly from Hyundai Motor Group, we also just saw recently from Toyota. They had an event at their headquarters in Texas where they announced their first battery EV, or first internally developed battery EV that they're going to launch next year, the BZ4X, I don't know, some stupid combination of letters and numbers. But there's also going to be another announcement from another Japanese automaker next week that I can't talk about yet. But they're going to be announcing a little more detail on their first EV product. So we are going to see a lot more details from across the industry about what is coming.
Sam, thank you very much for this. Really appreciate your insights.
My pleasure.